Hello, everyone. So today we're gonna have a nutrition talk with Dr. Susan Kleiner. So let me now invite her as I can, and then we will start. Let me try to find her first before we can. Let's see. There you go. Hope all is well for you all on your side. There we go. Good morning. Hello.
Hey, I did it.
Yeah. Wasn't too complicated, eh?
No, it wasn't too bad.
All right.
Get this set up. There we go. Whoop,
Good.
and like that.
Good evening,
That's
your time.
good. Pardon me?
Good evening to you.
Yeah, not quite. 4 o'clock. So I'm
Oh,
good. Yeah.
how are things over there for you? How's
Well, it's been really interesting. So I'm in Seattle in the
Mhm.
Pacific Northwest, and um, so the snow, the weather that's gone across the whole country, we did get it here, which we usually don't.
Mhm.
Maybe once a year we get snow, but I mean, this was a big snowstorm. And I was lucky. Our power didn't go out, but um, typically it does. So we expected our power to go out, but it didn't. And so, here I am. We're good, but most of the snow is gone now. It's warmed up to kind of early springtime temperatures, but the rest of the country is in a bad way.
Is like Seattle still very negatively affected by the COVID?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we've done, um, so this whole state of Washington and especially the Seattle area has done a lot better than a lot of the country. And a lot of that's due to the fact that there's so much high tech here that
Mhm.
people very early on we had the first case in the United States here, not very far from me. um, Not surprisingly, because a lot of people go back and forth to Asia and China in particular. um, but right away, I mean, within a couple of weeks, most of the high tech industry shut down and told people to go home and work from home. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Expedia, I mean, any of the companies you can think of. So hundreds of thousands of people by the middle of March already were working from home, even early March. And so the transmission rates here have never been as bad as many places in the country. Because it's a big city, but we've done a pretty good job of controlling it. And the hospitals have never gotten so like dangerously full. They've been full, but not dangerously full. But I mean, we can't compare to the job that's gone on in Singapore. you know um, you guys, and Singapore's one thing, right? You're tiny. um, there's a lot of control and um, and access to what you need.
Mhm.
Vietnam, I think, is incredibly impressive what they've done. um, I teach in South Vietnam a couple times a year. I haven't been there since March maybe of 2019. It's a long time. But I'm in communication with them a lot. And I think about they have a third of the population of the United States in this fraction of the space, nowhere near the economy, and the national wherewithal financially. And yet they have had something like, I think it's under 100 people have died of COVID. And they're just operating just fine, where it's horrible here, what's happened. And it was 100% unnecessary. It did not have to get like this. Not with the access to health care, the financial wherewithal. Everyone could have been taken care of the way they needed to be. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on why this never had to happen here.
Sorry. So, for those that don't know about you, can I get you to do a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, I started in sports nutrition, which the term wasn't even coined yet. I mean, in my PhD, I started in the early 1980s. My doctoral research was with steroid using and non-steroid using competitive male bodybuilders, championship male bodybuilders, looking at their diet and body composition, certainly drug use, and their health risks, both from their diet and their steroid use, and really documenting what they were doing. Not so much studying metabolism or muscle physiology. It was the first time that anyone had really documented their true diets, their true drug use, what happened with body composition while they were cycling, and the influence of drugs on cardiovascular disease risk. And so that was in the early, well, the paper was published in 1988, and there were many papers that came out of that study. There was body composition, there was dietary practices and cardiovascular risks. There was the influence of anabolic steroids on immune function. That had never been looked at before. So there were a number of papers that came out of that. I went on to study men and women competitive bodybuilders at the Mr. and Miss USA competition from the National Physique Committee in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I collected data at the competition. Never had been done before. And I was given permission by Jim Mannion, who owned the NPC, still around, to actually contact everyone who registered for the competition. So it was an amazing data collection. And we collected blood samples as well as documenting body composition and diet and just, how they felt, different kind of interesting sort of cultural questions in both males and females. The first time females had ever been studied, competitive female bodybuilders. Asked them about their drug use, and it was just very, it was humbling for me to be accepted to come in and collect that data at a competition. It was quite something. So that data was published. There were several papers that came out of that. And then I went on, obviously, to work in strength and power and speed, body composition, physique, athletes, bodybuilding athletes, and but also strength and power. So weightlifting, powerlifting, in the NFL, created the first full-time nutrition program in the NFL with the original Cleveland Browns, and Coach Bill Belichick, his first head coaching job was in Cleveland. And that was quite an experience. And then I really started to work kind of sports agnostic, any sports, but I was really well known in strength and power. It's where my research was, and where my experience was to start with. And I started to write books. I started to write magazine articles, speak, teach, educate, consult with business and industry, product development, and continued till this day. So I've worked in the NFL, the NBA. I've worked with in the NHL with some athletes. I've worked with first responders and with special forces in the military. I've worked with the WNBA, the National Women's Soccer League, the NWSL. I mean, just about every sport, as I said, you can think of, Olympians, professionals, but all the way to high school athletes, and certainly collegiate athletes, anyone who wants to improve their performance in mind and body. So whether it's on the court or on the pitch, on the trail, in the courtroom, in the boardroom, or the bedroom, any place that you want to achieve peak performance, I like to help people out. And you can find me at my website, which is drsKleiner.com. I have a book, The New Power Eating. I just had a lot of fun writing a book. Well, I did the very small lift on this book with Melody Schoenfeld, Diet Lies and Weight Loss Myths, that was just published by Human Kinetics. It's really her book, and I got to help a little bit and have fun. So, cooking, a lot about food, supplements, just how can you achieve peak performance? That's my goal.
Okay. So since we were speaking about, let's say, body recomposition, right? So here the questions come. So the general sense of it is like, if you're in a fat loss, it's a calorie deficit. If you're a mass building or muscle gaining, it's a kind of a calorie surplus. So if you're trying to go for, let's say, a body recomposition goal, so fat loss, gain muscle, like does your kind of like, is there like a certain specific calorie target, or say a protein, that your nutrition targets change a lot compared to a fat loss or muscle building?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, metabolically, lots of things are happening, and your goals will determine, what you're doing with your diet. And the number one thing that will alter your macronutrient needs is your fuel intake, right? So if you are in a building phase, if you want hypertrophy, then you need a lot of fuel. You need high calorie intake to cover the needs of your exercise, but also to cover the needs, because the hypertrophy exercise is high caloric demand, and then it's an additional high caloric demand for recovery, to fully recover from that. All of your connective tissues, as well as your lean tissue, and then the additional demand for building to sort of get bigger, faster, stronger, right? The only way we can do that is if we have the energy required to build. When we have adequate and even optimal fuel available, our protein needs are high because we need the building blocks to meet the demand for the additional tissue building and recovery as well from that hard hypertrophy sessions. And so but we are efficiently using our protein at that point. We're getting plenty of carbs, plenty of fat, plenty of calories, and so protein is being used only as protein, right? And so the protein need at that time ideally is around probably, and again, this will depend sometimes in very in heavyweight athletes, in big athletes. I have found personally that some of the evidence-based data doesn't quite hit the mark. That the evidence-based data is sometimes slightly low for protein requirements. And while we say if you have adequate fuel, your protein needs during hypertrophy are probably around 2 to 2.2, maybe 2.3 grams per kilogram per day, I have found that in my very large athletes, those that are very tall, and like a heavyweight bodybuilder, well over 6, well over 2, like 2 meters and more. Sometimes you can almost keep giving them more protein, and it's amazing how much they can consume. And there was a study done, it was never published, by the late Gail Butterfield many, many years ago, looking at protein needs of heavyweight bodybuilders. And she actually started to document this. These were conversations that I had with her, because very early on, when everyone was saying, oh, nobody needs more than 2 grams per kilogram per day, I said, I don't know. I'm working with these, big NFL players and heavyweight bodybuilders. And I can keep giving them more and more protein. It seems like they utilize it. And so, she saw it could go up to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. And then none of that was ever completed. Unfortunately, she passed away. But typically there isn't just this more and more and more need, because we are using protein quite efficiently. When we are in a cutting phase and energy intake is restricted and we are taking in less fuel than the body needs, typically at that time we are also restricting carbohydrate. And so if we are taking in less fuel and less carbs than the body requires, then protein is not used quite as efficiently. Some of the protein you consume does double duty and is used for energy, right? And so once the nitrogen moiety is lopped off of the protein molecule, and it, for all intents and purposes, it becomes a carbohydrate, then you need more protein in your diet to meet the actual needs of the body, the requirements that only protein as protein with nitrogen can do itself. And so protein needs go much higher when you're on a restricted fuel intake. That isn't new. When you are on a high protein, low carb diet, a nutrition 101 course will teach you that protein requirements go up. That it is not shocking that on a high protein diet, we actually need more protein. Or as we say, on a low carb diet, protein is utilized as energy. And so protein requirement goes up. So in that case, in someone, again, depending on their size, but in general at this point, we know that protein needs can go as high as perhaps 3 grams per kilogram per day, especially if you don't want to lose, if you're trying to hang on to as much mass as you possibly can, as much lean mass as you possibly can. So the problem occurs in going that high in the smaller athlete, because then we really are sort of creating a very lopsided diet that doesn't allow for adequate nutrition from the whole foods that we want, from enough fat and enough carb in the diet. And so the goal is then in a cutting diet not to do a dramatic fuel restriction. And in that way, you hang on to more of your muscle mass, you lose less mass, you still lose, but you'll lose fat, you'll slow the process down, and you don't have to create such a high protein diet to still meet your needs. And so that is, there are multiple reasons why you want a cutting diet to go on, first of all, for the least amount of time, but to occur that the fuel restrictions should not be so large.
Okay. So as you mentioned, like especially protein requirements may be higher, especially will be higher in the calorie deficit. Like, so with all these like time restricting eating styles, like 1 meal a day, intermittent fasting, do you find that it's using that approach would be quite detrimental to get the amount of protein they need, as if it's 3 grams a day, because there's a lot of protein in a very small eating time frame?
Right. So I think that when we are doing restriction, you shouldn't do too many different kinds of restriction at one time. So if you're doing intermittent fasting, then don't do such a dramatic calorie deficit. If you're doing a larger calorie deficit, then you need to eat more frequently. Don't do a large scale intermittent fast, right? So you might do a 12-hour fast, but don't do an 18-hour fast. Yes, the data, again, that shows that as long as you get enough protein in, it doesn't really matter if you separate it out during the day. We don't have that data on people in a strict caloric deficit, right? We haven't seen that data. The data has been optimal calories. If you eat 1 big meal a day or you eat 6 small meals a day, as long as you're getting in your protein, it appears that we basically do okay. First of all, it's pretty uncomfortable to do that if you need a lot of calories and a lot of protein. I mean, why do that when there isn't really a shown advantage? It's really what works best for you. In a lot of these strategies, whether it's intermittent fasting, whether it's and which style of intermittent fasting you're doing, or regular meals throughout the day, it's about the calorie deficit that you create. And so if you like the intermittent fasting and that works for you, do that. If it doesn't work for you, then eat the same number of calories spread throughout the day, and the results are the same as long as you're sticking to it. If you can't stick to it, then try a different strategy.
So this is for other people. Like, there isn't like like they say it's you only can optimize 30 grams of protein in per meal, things like that.
So that doesn't seem to pan out. That's kind of mythology. Again, there's what does the data tell us? The data does not back that up so far, but there may be a limit to what you can comfortably eat. And so with my clients, it depends on who they are and what the obstacles are in their day. And I have a lot of clients over many years that can easily consume, in certainly a shake, 40 grams or 50 grams of protein. And sometimes we have to do that because we're trying to get in a lot of food in a person that perhaps is doing 3 to 4 big physical activities during the day. And so whether they are in swim training or NFL training, you know, when you're in sports training and you're on a professional team, or you're, you know, in training, as I said, for big competition, you can't be so full and be able to train. And so it may mean that you eat a big breakfast that gives you a really big slug of nutrition, but then you have a big training session a couple hours later. Then you eat a good meal. Typically you'll have a shake, a recovery shake, then you'll eat a meal, then they nap, they get up, now they have to fuel for the workout again. So that's not going to have a lot of protein because that's sitting around in their stomach too long and they have to get to train. So they're using carbs. And then after that, it's a protein shake again and then a meal. Or let's say it's training camp and we've got a player who gets up and has a big breakfast. Whoops, light just fell. Gets up and has a big breakfast, but then has a workout out on the field. Then they come in and they can have some kind of a shake. Then they're going to maybe watch films. Then they're going to go back out on the field. Then they're going to lift, you know, and so there's moments throughout the day, but they can't in the middle of the day ever have another really big slug of food because they maybe have 3 or 4 training sessions during the day, whether it's, you know, throwing with the quarterback and it's skills and drills, or it's their lifting session, or then it's with their own coach, the offensive line coach, or something like that. If you're just training for yourself and you do one workout a day, you have far fewer obstacles and you can manage just what feels best and what works best for you. And in those cases, maybe splitting up, you know, smaller packets of protein throughout the day to have a minimum of 25 to 30 grams to make sure you've got your 2.4 to 2.6 grams of leucine to have what you need each time, for sure, to catalyze muscle protein synthesis and to halt muscle protein breakdown as much as possible with carbohydrate and protein together. And if you're a smaller athlete also, that can work rather than having to have these great big slugs of protein or of nutrition in general because of the obstacles in your day. But as I said, the idea that too much protein is going to give you kidney disease or you can't utilize more than 30 grams of protein at a time, that doesn't work out.
When you mentioned the leucine recommendation, is that also like the muscle full effect? Where like you can... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You can only use, like, your body utilizes a certain amount of leucine well, and after that, like, any more protein doesn't aid to additional, like, muscle protein synthesis.
So muscle protein synthesis doesn't just start and stop, right? It's on a curve, and we can optimize muscle protein synthesis. It will happen without sort of these optimal levels of leucine. It will happen. It just won't be optimized, and it won't happen at as rapid a rate, and it will start to taper maybe before or earlier than having met your potential. And so having the whole system catalyzed with the sort of the accelerator of leucine and optimal levels of leucine gets things moving very quickly. And the more quickly you get muscle protein synthesis moving forward, the more rapidly also you start to slow down muscle protein breakdown. And that's the balance. That's the teeter-totter or the seesaw. That's where we're trying, you want to, if you don't slow muscle protein breakdown after the hard assault of exercise, it's like 2 steps forward and 1 step back all the time, right? You're losing, you can't really get on beyond the amount of loss that you're having. So the goal is to slow muscle protein breakdown and to enhance muscle protein synthesis. And so leucine can enhance the speed of that happening. Once you have, but in order to really accomplish tissue building, you need all the amino acids. So just taking your branch chain amino acids or just taking leucine will not accomplish your goal. You need all of the essential and non-essential amino acids, because those are the building blocks that you need. Even if you have the fastest bricklayer around, if you don't have enough bricks for that person to lay, you can't build the building, right? So that's really kind of the way to think about this. And so moving forward from thinking about having enough leucine is having enough of everything, all the proteins, all the amino acids, and then beyond that, sure, there's a point of no return. There's a point where you have met what the body can do, and it's way more than you need, and perhaps it's way more fuel than you need. Now you're getting way too many calories that nobody has any use for, and so those will not continue to build tissue. And so that's why you need to determine what is the body's needs for fuel, what does the body need for carbohydrate, for fat, and for protein, so that you distribute your calories to give the body the best foundation that it needs. And just putting it all into the protein bucket won't make you bigger.
So while you're speaking about it, can you kind of like break that, say that for people like the anabolic window, you need to have a protein shake immediately after your workout. If not, you're gonna lose the gains.
So, it was such good research and such a good story that we hate to tell people don't do it, or that it's not so important anymore for several reasons. But let's start with how important do we still understand as the anabolic window. And what we know is that as far as hypertrophy, that anabolic window isn't so critical. As far as muscle glycogen replenishment, it does matter. So if you are only thinking hypertrophy and you're not thinking, I have a workout later today or early tomorrow morning, and I'm also restricting calories, so I want to make sure that my muscle glycogen levels are replenished for that next workout. If that doesn't matter to you, then, as I said, the window doesn't matter all that much. Just eat well. Make sure that you're fueling and you're eating well. But for muscle glycogen replenishment, what we understand about glucose kinetics and the kinetics of muscle glycogen replenishment is that there is a more rapid rate of replenishment within that sort of 15 minutes to an hour post-exercise, as soon as after exercise as possible, up to about an hour or 2 hours max, where you have a more rapid rate of glycogen replenishment. It doesn't mean that you won't replenish, but you will replenish at a slower rate, and it continues to slow over time. So depending on how much time you have, like I said, with my elite swimmers who do 3 workouts a day, I want that replenishment to happen as rapidly as possible. And so as soon as they get out of the pool, they're drinking a carb shake. It may have some protein, it may have protein in there, and typically post-exercise it does. The biggest reason is carbohydrate replenishment, but then certainly getting protein in them and getting the anabolic response is good. And that carb protein combination does give us an anabolic hormonal environment. And so we are working with that. But as I said, that's what I love about science, is science changes. It's a challenge. And if your ego is too big, you're going to get stuck in the past, because I wrote a lot about the anabolic window. And now I say, doesn't matter so much, not for hypertrophy, at least.
So it's more about if you have multiple training sessions, especially more, I would say, yeah, like 2 to 3 multiple training sessions, that getting in your carbohydrate intake in the shortest period of time would be the best.
Yeah, but the other thing is, as I said, we almost hate to tell people don't do this, because it's such a good habit to nourish yourself after exercise. Because what happens to so many people who are not elite athletes, who have someone else watching out for them, and that's all they have to worry about, is that very many people, if they don't take something immediately after exercise, hours may go by. Many hours may go by before they have anything. And that does have a negative consequence on many levels. Number one is they don't get to take advantage of their sort of recovery extra burn, right? And they have their the thermogenic effect of food coupled with the thermogenic effect of recovery. And so you kind of get a real bang for your buck on calorie burning if you nourish yourself immediately after exercise. If you wait a long time between your training and consuming anything, then you have missed the opportunity to maximize that training session. You have missed the opportunity to maximize muscle protein synthesis as well as glycogen replenishment, because as time goes by, the body is not in that sort of recovery mode anymore. And lastly, many people get the opposite effect, right? They get hangry. They are their mood alters. They're physically uncomfortable. They also don't rehydrate. They don't take care of themselves after their workout, and they never get the results, and they never know why. And so despite the fact that it might not be critical for their hypertrophy to nourish themselves within some anabolic window that has become somewhat artificial, the fact is that we all do better if we nourish ourselves after exercise, especially if many, many hours will go by before you have anything.
And would it be better to allocate more of your, let's say, your macros after your workout, or is it better to just allocate it like evenly out through the day?
I think an even distribution is really good. That's what I work on, and depending again on when the workouts are, right, on the individual. If you're a nighttime or late, very late afternoon to really evening trainer, and you can consume plenty of food in the evening, very often that late evening meal becomes a big meal. The problem with a heavy meal late in the day is that it may disrupt sleep. And so there's so many things that are critically important to manage to get the training outcomes that we're looking for. And so ideally, I like to start with the biggest, not necessarily the biggest, but a nice substantial meal in the morning. If you're a morning trainer, then certainly, depending on whatever the training session is and the goal of the morning training session, we'll have some kind of carbohydrate fuel prior to that training session. Again, it may be a liquid fuel, it may be food. It depends on it. That's highly individualized with the what can you handle and your stomach. And then there would be a significant breakfast, and that would be the big recovery meal. Then there may be a shake, then there may be lunch, then there may be a shake in the afternoon and dinner. And as we're working toward evening, we are kind of tapering as we're getting toward the last meal and or snack of the day, depending on the quantity of calories that we're trying to get in. And so I like to let things taper, especially I will taper sort of the what I call the dry carbs, the heavy grains, heavy beans. We will start to taper those as we get into the evening. Doesn't mean there won't be any. It just means that they play a more substantial role earlier in the day. As we go, if it's an evening training session, then pretty much we have to flip the strategy and make morning can still be a good substantial breakfast. The athlete will be eating well throughout the day, but then we have to taper before the training session so you're not too full, so that everything is well digested going into that late afternoon or evening training session. And then we figure out what can the athlete handle in the evening. And I have some athletes that have substantial shakes, but they don't have food in the evening. And sometimes it's a serious meal, an athlete that can handle a lot. And other times, like I said, it's enough. We get in enough protein. We get in enough of what they need for recovery, but it is not a big meal at all in the evening. So again, it's very individualized. You have to figure out what works for you. That's kind of the art with the science of sports nutrition.
As you mentioned athletes, right? Do you have any athletes competing in the Olympics this year?
Well, we're all holding our fingers crossed that there's going to be an Olympics this year, right? And so yeah. I do have a few hopefuls, yes.
Okay. Yeah,
I have two that are highly likely that would be surprising if they weren't there. And then I have a couple of hopefuls, yes.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, do you think the Olympics is happening this year?
Boy, I have no idea. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know. I don't know. It would be so sad if it didn't happen. For so many of the athletes, especially the first timers, right? The training that has gone in and the timing required to be at your peak for the Olympics. For any time you compete, right? It's all about timing, and missing that 2 years in a row. I think there's a lot of, particularly, like I said, first timers, and then those at the end of their careers who may never be able to make it up if it doesn't happen this year. And that's what's hard. It's probably, whatever they decide, I hold my fingers crossed it's the right decision.
All right. Yeah, because I was speaking with a friend about it yesterday. It was like, it probably has to be some closed door event, and if you have a quarantine time frame, then that's not going to be the best for any athlete, because unless you're playing esports, that's a whole different.
Right. Well, I just don't know. The sports that have big teams and a lot of support will do better in managing it than, like I said, those that are just individuals who, especially here in the States where they're training on their own, they may or may not have very much support. It's really hard. I mean, I have had the wonderful opportunity to be at the Singapore Institute of Sport and have met the folks there. And, you know, there's a lot of support for your athletes. And it's like a family. They're small and everyone's kind of together. Here, people are very spread out. Many times it's their local town that's raised enough money for them and their family to be able to go to the Olympics. It's a really big deal. And how those athletes maneuver and manage their way through year after year, trying to get there and then not having the Olympics, it's really hard. But I really respect the decisions that have to be made. And as I said, coming from a country that's done a terrible job managing COVID, you know, I don't know that I'd want a bunch of Americans coming into my country. I don't know. Hopefully, as I said, by July, things will look different in the world. I don't know what Japan is going to look like. I mean, we just don't know with all these variants. And just as you think you might have control, it might explode again. I mean, who knows?
Okay. So we move back to nutrition. So like, have you found that, what mistakes do you see that people normally make when for a fat loss phase and the muscle building phase? Do you see very common mistakes that people make?
Yeah, so fat loss, for sure, people go way too low in their calories. My whole philosophy is eat as much as you can to get the results that you're looking for, not eat as little as you can. Whenever you are eating as little as you can, you are putting huge limits on your potential. So why not figure out how high you can go with your calories and still get the results that you're looking for? And that's the strategy that I use. And I will start, and I write this in my books, and I've been saying it for years. If you know where you maintain your weight, let's say, I don't know, say you're maintaining your weight at 3,500 calories a day. And you do your workouts, and you maintain, you don't move. You stay pretty close to your body weight stays, your body composition stays pretty close. Your sleep is good, your energy levels are good, all of that at about 3,500 calories. The first drop in calories would be in nutrition, energy-wise. I would drop down only for a man, 400 calories. For a woman, 300 calories. And see what happens. Now, you might be changing your training at the same time, and so it kind of blows the equation, right? It blows the formula. If now you're in a cutting phase or fat loss phase, and you've now changed your workout. So the first thing to do is keep your training the same and just drop by 300 to 400 calories and see what happens. Very often, you have to give it a little time. Give it a couple of weeks. See what happens. And typically you will see you'll start to cut pretty well. Now, then if you change your training modality and you start to increase energy output, you will get a greater energy deficit. You may see a little bit faster results, but what you want to be careful with is pay attention to your sleep. If your sleep goes off, stop dropping calories immediately, because the minute your sleep is disturbed, the whole metabolic cycle is disturbed. And so you will not continue to get the results you're looking for. So I would say if you've increased your training output, and that's the training modality you want to do for your cutting phase, then if you're starting to see that you're not sleeping well, or you're getting a little brain fog, or you're not getting good results in your training sessions, that you're fatiguing too soon, then raise your calorie intake 100 calories, 150, 200, little bits. And it's in those margins where you find your sweet spot, in those very small margins. Now, if when you went through your hypertrophy phase, you put on a lot of fat, that's a different story, right? Because if you have a lot of weight to drop, you have a much larger margin to play with your weight loss. And so with dropping, you increased your calories so much that then to maintain that body weight, even with the extra fat, takes a lot more calories. And so you can drop your calories by more than 400. You could go down, some people, you can drop much more. Let's say now at that high weight that you're coming from, you were maintaining that at 4,500 calories, not 3,500 calories. And so if you were at 4,500 calories, well, then drop down 500, 600, 700 calories, see what happens. If you're not getting enough results, maybe you need to drop 1,000 calories. But I would typically never go 1,000 calories to start with, ever, with anybody, because I want to see what's the least amount that we have to drop, not the most that we have to drop. Because you may get the same cut from only a 400 calorie drop as you will from 1,000 calories. And that's the trick, to find the most that you can eat, not the least that you can eat.
Mm. And then I assume that for muscle building mistakes or like hypertrophy, people just generally eat anything they see, like a seafood diet. Is that typically like a nutritional mistake you see people make, or?
Right. And it's pretty old school, right?
Hmm.
That's the bad old days of bodybuilding, is just get as big as you can, no matter what tissue you're laying down. Eat as much as you can. That's really not the current state of the science or the art of hypertrophy. We want people to progressively gain as much lean mass and the least amount of fat mass as possible. Of course, you're always going to gain fat along with lean. You're always going to lose lean along with fat. You can't separate them out. But the goal is to optimize the lean gain and minimize the fat gain. And the way you do that is also by slowly adding calories and figuring out how much do you need to add to start to gain. And so one part of that is determining what's your energy output from your hypertrophy sessions, right? From your training sessions. What is the true calorie need of those workouts, and what's the calorie need of the recovery? Then once you figure that out, you add that in because you want to optimize plus more. And so it may be that you do add 1,000 calories a day, but you might start just at 400 or 500 calories. See where that gets you. Inch it up slowly over several weeks. And so that's why don't put yourself into a time corner, right? Don't say, I've only got 2 months to gain all this weight, or I've only got 2 months to lose all this weight. What we want is to give ourselves plenty of time, and ideally to cycle toward that, right? That you're never going to make the gains overnight. You're never going to make the losses overnight. that you really have as your goals, it's going to take a number of cycling sessions of gains and losses and gains and losses to get yourself where you want to go. There isn't a 25-year-old bodybuilder who can match the back of a 50-year-old bodybuilder, right? It's impossible. The years of building is what gets you where you want to go. And so it's the cycling through hypertrophy phases and cutting phases, on and off and on and off, planning those, knowing that you have time for that. And the other is to never gain so much that the time that you have to lose isn't enough time, and you have to do a drastic calorie drop, because then you don't look good and you don't feel good. And so the goal is, whether it's cutting for a bodybuilding or a physique competition, or it's cutting for a wrestling match, it doesn't matter. You want to be the strongest and feel the best that you can going into a meet. And if you're not, the person who planned better will win.
So for somebody that's a non-competitor, let's say your average ID like hypertrophy guy, like do you have a recommendation on like a body fat percentage to start gaining muscle? Like, you don't like, sometimes you don't want to be over 20% body fat and still be in a gaining phase. So do you have like a recommendation?
I don't really have that so much. I mean, um, I have to say that I have had, and it was a surprise when I started writing my book, Power Eating, and publishing it, and it's now in its 5th edition, The New Power Eating. I never expected to hear from people who had never exercised ever, who were overweight and obese, who had stayed away from a gym or any kind of training because they thought they had to do aerobics, and then read my book, discovered they could go lift weights in sweats and actually get results. And so what that taught me is, don't tell people where they need to be before they start to train. And so, no, there is no, don't go into a hypertrophy phase if you're at 30% body fat, right? I mean, if you have very little muscle and you're over 20% body fat, well, maybe what will feel best is to gain some muscle, is to really get some serious heavy lifting that you are working toward. Of course, you don't start there, but to work toward that, because it's a goal that when you really accomplish some heavy lifting, man, you know it, right? I mean, there is nothing that feels better than doing a personal best, right? I mean, lifting something that you never thought you would ever do before. And so maybe you don't need to add calories to what you've been doing. Maybe those calories need to be redistributed through your training. But I would never say, don't start a hypertrophy phase if you are over 20% body fat.
Okay. So we're gonna have two last questions. So, as you've been to Singapore quite often, right? Would I be
No,
correct?
once, but
Oh,
I would
okay.
love to make it often.
Okay. So have you been to, okay, do you eat out a lot when you were in Singapore? Okay. So using Asia or Singapore example, right? Like, especially with sometimes people have find how cheap eating out is, especially if you go to like the hawker centers. Like, how do you plan nutrition around there where most of the time you don't know what goes into the food?
Yeah. Well, so I guess it's a conversation how often you're going to do that, right? So if even if it's a cheap way to eat, it won't be a successful strategy if you're doing that every day, because you don't know what's in that food. And so the first thing that becomes difficult is you say, well, I think I'm only eating chicken and rice, but it probably isn't just chicken and rice. There's probably some fat in there. There's probably other things that are added. And so I need to determine what's in the food. And so one thing you can do, depending probably on the stall, would be to ask them, say, I've got these physical goals. Can you tell me, like, don't give me your exact recipe. I know you're not going to share that, but can you tell me basically the list of ingredients for what I'm eating? And so you can start there. I mean, questioning what's in food for anybody who eats out anywhere is important when you've got real goals of what physical, whether it's a, an exercise output goal or it's just your physique goal. And then sort of understanding that the more frequently you eat places that you have no idea what you're eating, the slower you'll get to your results. And so maybe it's that you eat there once or twice a week, max, and then you actually learn to prepare some food at home. And or you find a couple of places that will share with you what they've got in it, and those are the places you go, because that's what they'll eat. And so when I work with clients, so many of my clients are all over the world, and we figure out the places that they're eating. We figure out what's actually in the food, and they know what they can order where and how that fits into their plan. And they know if they've got, one meal a week, whenever that is just open season. Whatever you want that day, go for it, right? It's usually after some big, huge training day. And so it's either that evening or the next day. It's a full recovery day. Do what you want, but within reason. Like, people are, I never call anything a cheat day. I don't like that negative terminology. It means you're doing something wrong, and you're not. It's built in. It's part of the plan. I do not like negative self-talk. And the problem is, particularly with women and girls, is that, first of all, they are masters at negative self-talk. And the second is that if they have what they call a cheat day or a cheat meal, it implies that they've done something wrong. And so now, what is the punishment for that? Typically, it's continuing to eat off the plan. And it gets harder and harder and harder to get back to where you planned to be in the beginning. And so why set people up for that? It really sets them up for failure. Women and girls in particular, less so, I have found, with men, but it certainly happens with men. And I just do not like negative labels. And so that's what I said. It's just part of the plan. And they know the things that they like to eat. Do you want a glass of wine? Do you want chocolate? People are, by this point, pretty specific with what they know they like to have. And so we just build it in.
And the last question before you go, being so known in the sport, do you see any trends coming up within, let's say this year? Is it a lot more people focusing on immune health compared to other things, or do you see any trends coming up?
Well, certainly immune health. I mean, they couldn't keep any of those products, the supplements on the shelf, you know. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy for immune health. And the sports specific side kind of fell away, right? I mean, the business around sports, sports nutrition, all of that went away. I think what this has taught people, the average person, COVID and the lockdown and the the sense of isolation, um, and the loss of control for the expectations that we have in life. I think it's helped people reconsider how they feel, what really matters. Does having six-pack abs make you a happy person? Will being able to say that you accomplished some very specific workout really make you feel better about yourself? I mean, why are you doing what you're doing? And what is sort of a happiness lifestyle? I think that concept of happiness and self-worth and self-esteem that should not be so wrapped up in the way we look and our ability to compete with someone else and their numbers online is really an important lesson, I think, that has come out of COVID. And the ability to be resilient, to say, yeah, you know what? I couldn't go to my workouts. I couldn't go to the gym. I'm a group exercise person and I couldn't do that. But I found I could do yoga online, or I could put my bike on a trainer and I could get on my bicycle and do my own personal spin class. I didn't have to spend whatever it costs to buy an online program and a fancy bike and all that. There are things I could do by myself. And yeah, if I put on a little weight and I don't look quite as fit, life is a journey and I'll get back to it, right? And I think that I'm hearing much more of that, much less self-deprecation than than as sad as this time has been. I think that there has perhaps been some very good learning, self-appreciation learning coming out of it, even by the trainers online, even, you know, by folks like yourself, you know, speaking in a different way to people to help them find what works for them, and that there isn't a absolute set strategy for success, and that is very important. When people say to me, you know, I did this diet and that diet and the other diet, and it worked for this person, it worked for that person, and it doesn't work for me. It's like, well, so it doesn't work for you. Let's try something else. You know, there is no one way. I do certainly work by the evidence and the science, and there are certain things that just don't work. I don't care how much somebody's trying to sell it, but there are many many places where we can adjust and try and help people find success. And I try that. I know you do that, and it takes the pressure off of people.
Okay. Any new books coming out from you personally, or anything you're working on?
I am working on something. It's not a book, I'll say that. I'm not ready to say what it is, but you know, if you're not working on something during this time, then you've had a great TV binging session, which I've also had. But
Okay, good.
yeah. there is something in the works. We'll see if it comes through.
No worries. So let me thank you for your time. Um, Maria says hi. She's met you a few times at the ISSN Columbia.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, I know Maria. Hi.
So yeah, so like I mean, know that probably I think we won't be able to get you into Singapore probably for the next year or two because of how Singapore is. Like it's all tourism based until every country is vaccinated or things like that that we won't be able to bring people in. So hopefully we get to see you. If not, I'll find you something for online for something that
Or maybe you'll come to
yeah.
ISSN.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about it. Like, I want to go do a degree in something. I was thinking of psychology, but I also want to do the IS in nutrition. But I left school at 16, right? So, you need a degree. So I'm like, I need a
Yeah, you
degree
do
in something.
need a degree.
Yeah, I left school to play games, but that didn't work out too much. All right.
Well, you're doing a good job. So keep it up. And thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I've never done an Instagram live before. So now I can put that on my resume.
Yeah, good. Like the time limit used to be an hour. Like at 59 minutes, it starts telling you like you have 1 minute
Oh,
left. So now
okay.
it's much longer. I don't think
Oh,
there's a
good.
time. All right.
Okay.
So let me thank you for your time. Let me not keep you up for too long. Thank you so much for coming here, and then hope to converse with you and see what's exciting and happening for you.
Thank you so much. You take care. Bye bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Take care. I'll tag you on this.
Oh, fabulous.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you,
Bye.
Dr. See ya. Thank you, everybody.